In just 47 seconds, $72 million in taxpayer funds vanished into luxury sky travel. Kash Patel didn't expect the receipts. He didn't expect the flight logs. Cameras captured everything. The Senate chamber froze. What did Senator Peter Welch reveal that made the FBI director's entire defense crumble in real time? At exactly 2:14 p.m. on a frigid Tuesday in Washington, FBI Director Kash Patel walked into the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room like an investigator who had seen too many lies. His Navy suit was pressed to perfection, FBI badge gleaming under the harsh, fluorescent lights. Stacks of classified folders sat before him, arranged with military precision. The mahogany conference table stretched like a battlefield between him and his interrogators. Behind Patel, 3 FBI legal advisors shuffled nervously through briefing papers. Their whispered conversations created a low hum of anxiety that filled the ornate chamber. Television cameras tracked every movement with surgical precision. Senator Peter Welch sat like a Vermont prosecutor who had waited years for this moment. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of dairy farming before politics, gripped a manila envelope marked confidential flight records. The chamber buzzed with reporters from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and dozens of international outlets, their cameras positioned to catch every micro-expression. The gallery was packed with government watchdog groups, FBI agents, and curious congressional staffers. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a subpoena. Director Patel, Welch began, his voice cutting through the tension like a Vermont winter wind. Let's discuss your travel expenses during your tenure as FBI director. Specifically, the $72 million in taxpayer funds that seem to have disappeared into thin air. Patel's jaw tightened slightly, a muscle twitching near his left temple. His legal team leaned forward, sensing danger. Senator, all my travel has been within federal guidelines and necessary for national security operations. I resent any implication otherwise. Committee Chairman Dick Durbin cleared his throat. The senator's time begins now. Welch nodded grimly. Thank you, Chairman. Director Patel, are you familiar with Executive Order 14589, which requires all federal officials to use the most cost-effective transportation methods? Of course, Senator. Good. Then you'll have no trouble explaining this. The first document hit the table at 2:16 p.m. like a legal grenade. This shows $14.2 million in private jet expenses in your first 6 months alone. Welch continued, sliding the paper across the mahogany desk with deliberate precision. The document landed with a soft thud that echoed through the silent chamber. Care to explain why you needed a $47,000 per hour Gulfstream G650 for a trip to Miami? A trip that, according to your calendar, had no official FBI business scheduled. Patel's knuckles went white as he gripped his pen, the expensive Mont Blanc clicking audibly in the microphone. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chamber's Arctic air conditioning. Senator, those flights were essential for time-sensitive FBI operations. I cannot compromise ongoing investigations by flying commercial. National security requires. National security? Welch interrupted, his eyebrows raising dramatically. Director, this flight manifest shows you ordered champagne service and flew with your personal chef. What classified operation requires Dom Perignon at 40? The chamber held its breath like a held note in an opera. Cameras zoomed in as Patel's face flesh red. Behind him, his legal advisors exchanged panicked glances. One slipped out of the room entirely, presumably to start damage control with the media. Then explain this. Welch's voice dropped to a whisper that carried across the silent room like thunder in a cathedral. Welch opened his manila envelope with theatrical precision, like a magician revealing his final, devastating trick. Gagamian spilled across the mahogany table like an avalanche of corruption. Flight logs cascaded across the table. Private jets to Martha's Vineyard during peak lobster season. Luxury aircraft to ski resorts in Aspen for what Patel claimed were emergency counterterrorism briefings. A $89,000 flight to attend what the FBI director had officially listed as an international law enforcement summit, but was actually his college roommate's wedding in Napa Valley. Senator Ted Cruz, who had been silent until now, leaned into his microphone. Director Patel, did the FBI really need to rent a $150,000 per day yacht in Monaco for what you called maritime surveillance operation? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Patel's face drained of color like water flowing from a broken dam. His hands visibly shook as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over. The FBI badge on his desk caught the harsh, fluorescent light, seeming to mock him with its golden gleam. Senator, those flights had legitimate purposes. Every single expense was approved through proper channels by my office. Your office? Welch's eyebrows shot up like rockets. Director, according to FBI financial records, you personally signed off on your own travel expenses. Isn't that like a bank robber approving his own getaway car? Nervous laughter rippled through the gallery before Chairman Durbin gavelled for order. But Welch wasn't finished. Not even close. The Vermont senator was just getting warmed up. At exactly 2:19 p.m., Welch's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. More coming. Check the Swiss accounts. The receipts are all there. A friend of justice. The senator's eyes lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. He looked up from his phone with the expression of a hunter who had just spotted his prey. Director Patel, Welch said, his Vermont accent sharpening to a razor's edge. Did you or did you not bill the FBI $72 million for personal luxury travel disguised as official business? And before you answer, please remember that lying to Congress is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Committee members leaned forward. Reporters held their breath. Camera operators zoomed in for extreme close-ups. Behind Patel, his remaining legal advisor scribbled frantically on a yellow legal pad, then slid it toward him. Patel glanced down, and his face went even paler. The note read, Fifth Amendment, invoke now. But Patel's ego wouldn't let him take the fifth, not in front of the cameras, not with his reputation on the line. The silence stretched for 4 eternal seconds. Even the cameras seemed to stop breathing. Patel leaned forward, sweat visible on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. Senator, I reject your characterization entirely. Every flight was approved through proper channels. Welch smiled, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of a Vermont prosecutor who had just laid a perfect trap. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy wedding photo. Then you won't mind explaining why your national security flight to Monaco happened on the exact same weekend as your daughter's wedding. Welch slid the photo across the table. Here you are, Director, toasting with champagne that cost more than most Americans make in a month. Was this part of your counterterrorism strategy? The photo showed Patel in a $5,000 tuxedo, raising a crystal glass of Dom Perignon 1996, surrounded by Monaco's elite, at what was clearly a luxury wedding reception overlooking the Mediterranean. The gasps rippled through Congress like a shockwave hitting a skyscraper. Reporters frantically typed on their laptops. Fox News anchor Brett Baer cut to breaking news. CNN interrupted regular programming with a developing story banner. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow was already composing her opening monologue in her head. Patel's hands trembled as he shuffled his papers. That flight had multiple purposes. I was meeting with international law enforcement contacts. At a wedding reception, the room erupted. Cameras flashed. Twitter exploded with Patel jet scandal trending worldwide. At 2:22 p.m., Welch delivered what would become known as the killing blow heard round the world. He reached into his briefcase one final time and pulled out a thick manila folder marked Confidential Financial Crimes Unit. The folder hit the table with the weight of justice itself. Director Patel, this folder contains credit card statements, wire transfer records, and bank account summaries from 3 different financial institutions. Welch's voice carried the authority of someone who had done his homework. It shows $340,000 in charges at luxury hotels during your so-called official trips, the Hotel Ducat Eden Rock in Anta Bay, the Palazzo Margherita in Italy, the Amangiri Resort in Utah. He spread the documents across the table like a royal flush in poker. Each of these hotels, director, costs more per night than the average FBI agent makes in a month. And according to these receipts, you stayed in the presidential suites every single time. Patel's hands trembled so violently he had to clasp them together to stop the shaking. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the FBI letterhead in front of him, causing the ink to blur. Director Patel, Welch continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The American people deserve an answer. Taxpayers who work double shifts to make ends meet deserve an answer. FBI agents who risk their lives for $60,000 a year deserve an answer. The chamber fell silent as a tomb. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I have one simple question for you, Director. One question that cuts through all the legal jargon, all the bureaucratic doublespeak, all the excuses. Patel's voice cracked slightly. Yes, Senator. Welch leaned back in his chair, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke 4 words that would end a career. Where is the money? The chamber exploded. Patel's face went ashen. His legal advisors whispered frantically in his ear. The FBI badge on his desk seemed to lose its shine under the brutal lights. Senator, Patel stammered, his usual confidence evaporating like morning mist. Where is the money? Welch repeated, each word hitting like a hammer blow. Patel's defense collapsed in real time, his prepared talking points scattered like leaves in a hurricane. The man who had built his career on exposing corruption was now cornered by his own greed. The flights were necessary for. Patel's voice trailed off as he realized every excuse sounded hollow in the face of the evidence. Within minutes, "Where is the money?" was trending across every social media platform on Earth. News anchors interrupted soap operas and game shows. Emergency congressional sessions were called. The White House press secretary was dragged from her lunch to face a barrage of questions. By 10:25 p.m., 3 senators had called for Patel's immediate resignation. By 10:27 p.m., that number had grown to 8. By 10:30 p.m., the Justice Department's Inspector General had opened a formal investigation. By 10:45 p.m., the FBI Agents Association had issued a statement distancing themselves from their director. By 3:00 p.m., Kash Patel had quietly left the building through a back exit, his FBI career in smoking ruins, his security detail already reassigned. The Capitol building buzzed with activity like a disturbed beehive. Senators huddled in urgent, whispered conversations. House members canceled afternoon meetings to watch the hearing replays. Lobbyists frantically called their clients to assess political fallout. Senator Welch sat back in his leather chair, his work done. 4 simple words had accomplished what months of investigations, newspaper exposés, and whistleblower complaints couldn't. They had torn down the curtain of corruption and exposed the truth about power, greed, and the price of betraying public trust. The aftermath would be swift and merciless. The next morning, FBI agents would raid Patel's offices with boxes and evidence bags. Swiss bank accounts totaling $4.7 million would be frozen pending investigation. The luxury jet companies that had enabled this fraud would face federal scrutiny. 3 government contractors would lose their security clearances. But in that moment, in that historic chamber where democracy lived and breathed, justice was served with 4 perfect purds that would echo through the corridors of power for generations. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of corruption spanning multiple federal agencies. Congressional hearings would last for months. Documentary filmmakers would spend years trying to capture the full scope of the scandal. But it all started with a Vermont farmer turned senator who refused to let corruption hide in the shadows, and 4 words that cut through lies like a laser through steel. Where is the money? Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a badge or a subpoena, it's truth, delivered at exactly the right strand by someone who refuses to let corruption hide in the shadows. What happens when a leader who built power on others' secrets is undone by his own greed? If law fortune can't police itself, who watches the watchers? The cameras kept rolling, the questions kept coming, and somewhere in Vermont, Senator Peter Welch smiled, knowing that sometimes the simplest questions reveal the biggest truths. The $72 million scandal would make headlines for months. Patel would face federal charges. The FBI would be forced to implement new oversight procedures. But it all started with 4 words that cut through lies like a laser. Where is the money?